Hello and welcome, English home language teachers, to our workshop on the writing process. So today we are going to take a look at ways in which we can teach our FET home language learners how to use the writing process when writing essays or transactional pieces. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen so that you can see the PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared. So I'm going to start with the first slide. So my name is Nokanya Kumalo, and this recording was done on the 28th of September in the year of 2021. As I've mentioned earlier, it's going to be very helpful to all English FET home language teachers. So I've included a quote by a famous poet, Robert Frost. It reads, "I've never started a poem, yet whose end I knew. Writing a poem is discovering." This is the kind of mentality that we need to have as English home language teachers, and the kind of mentality we need to pass on to our students as well when it comes to writing. Students need to view writing as a process, not something that they do at once. It has to be something that they do step by step, and that's what we're going to look at today. That's one of the ways in which we can make sure that the written pieces that our students produce are of good quality, that they're coherent, that they actually make sense. So we'll look at the CAP's background to the process of writing practices. This can be found on the CAPS document, the English FET phase, home language FET phase, CAPS document, pages 30 to 40. So the CAPS document basically highlights the fact that writing instruction will always involve working through the writing process. But in some cases, these are cases such as exams, unfamiliar text, when teachers focus on paragraph writing and sentence construction. Students aren't really obligated to follow the writing process because in this case, we take a lot of things into consideration. For example, in an exam setting, the student would not really have much time to follow the entire writing process. So they might plan if they do have time, but they might not have adequate time to pre-plan firstly, draw up a mind map, proofread, although these are important things, but sometimes they might not get enough time to do these things. So during the writing process, learners should do the following. So we have steps to follow. We start off with pre-writing. Learners need to be taught about the pre-writing phase or step. Then we move on to drafting. And then after drafting, we move on to revising. That is the revision phase or the revision step. And then afterwards, we move on to editing. And then we go on to publishing or publication or presenting our written pieces. So with the pre-writing phase, this phase or step is also known as the planning process. This is the phase where the student is basically going to plan out their written piece, be it an essay or a transactional piece. So it's sort of like building a house. When you're going to build a house, you don't just go straight into building. You firstly need to plan. You need to know how many rooms you want your house to have. You need to know how big you want your house to be. There are a lot of things to take into consideration. Okay, so the students need to be told to determine the requirements of the format, the style, and point of view. So these would be included in the criteria, or rather the rubric or assessment guide that their teacher would give them. Okay, they also need to brainstorm ideas using mind maps, spiderweb lists, or charts. Chart lists, my mistake. So the student basically needs to use what works best for them. If they feel like a mind map would be more effective in helping them to brainstorm ideas, then they can go ahead and do that. If they feel like a spider web would help, or a chart, or a list. So anything that would basically give them that opportunity to plan out their work. So to scribble or write it down. Okay, then they need to consult relevant sources, then select relevant information. So this obviously cannot be done without the learners doing their own research. So they'd have to go and do research, and then from that research that they've gathered, or the information that they've gathered, they'd have to look at which information would be relevant, which sources to use, so what to include and what to leave out, because when we plan what we're going to write, we need to basically sift, or rather choose, what works best and what's going to give us the best results. Okay, so basically the first step, pre-planning or pre-writing, is all about this mind map. So thinking of how you're going to plan, what resources you're going to use, your timing. You think about your target audience as well. So who, which, so you have your options, so you know what to choose and what not to choose, where, what, and why. So these are things that you have to look at when planning, or rather when the students plan their written pieces. Then we move on to drafting. So for drafting, we need to teach the students that they have to use main ideas, or the main ideas from the planning process. So they've planned out their work, they have multiple ideas, and as I mentioned, they have to sift, they have to choose which ideas to go with. So once they've selected those ideas, then they'll have to write them down. So this happens in the drafting process. And then produce a first draft, which takes into account purpose, audience, topic, and genre. So the students need to bear in mind that this is a first draft. They might end up having multiple drafts, but the objective is to get to a final draft that the student is happy to submit. Okay, they need to read carefully and ask for feedback. So they can ask their classmates to read through their work. They can ask their teachers, they can ask their parents. So people that they basically trust and know that will provide them with good feedback, constructive feedback. So they'll be able to show them their mistakes and tell them, maybe you can structure your words this way instead of structuring your words that way. They need to determine their diction, their word choice. So the words need to make the writing clear and vivid. They also need to establish an identifiable voice and style by adapting language and tone to suit the audience and purpose for writing. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is like planning planning to build a house. You firstly start with a draft and you get multiple drafts. Then you get to your final draft, and then afterwards you build your home. Okay, so then we get to the 4 last stages, which are revising, um, editing, proofreading, and presenting. Sorry, my mistake. So when revising, you have to use the criteria, or the students have to use the criteria that their teachers would have given them to guide them so that they know what to do, exactly what's required of them. They can also use the assessment guide. They can also um, use the rubric, if there is a rubric that they've been given, that will basically tell them what the teacher expects of them. They have to refine their word choice, sentences and paragraphs, make sure that it's all structured well, eliminate all ambiguity, double meaning, verbosity, redundancy, slang, and any offensive language, evaluate content, style, and register to ensure that it's relevant and that it actually resonates with the target audience. Then they need to also use correct punctuation marks. They have to check their spelling and grammar to make sure that everything is correct and that everything is appropriate. Excuse me. Before actually submitting. So once all of this has been checked, once the work has been proofread, once it's been revised, or rather revised, edited, proofread, then we move on to presenting. So this is when you or the student publishes their work. Okay, so they have prepared their final draft and then they present the text. Okay, so they publish it. Okay, and then we're going to look at essay and transactional writing, the differences between the two. So when we look at essay writing, we look at extended pieces of writing in which a writer expresses their point of view on the topic given. And this type of writing should have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. It can be on climate change, on abortion, on politics, or on any other topic that has been given. But the learners have to make sure that they follow the correct essay writing format. So you start with your introduction, your body, and then your conclusion. And then when it comes to transactional writing, so transactional writing takes are either a response or an initiation of a response as implied. These texts are a transaction. So for example, a letter of appreciation will possibly yield a response as much as a speech will get the audience won over or yelling in disagreement. So these are things such as diary entries, letters. So we get formal and informal letters, we get CVs, cover letters. We have different types of transactional texts. Okay, so that brings us to our next slide. So we have essay types, different types of essays. We have different types of transactional texts as well. So for essays, we have narrative essays, which focus on telling a story. We have descriptive essays, which basically describe like a scenario, an event. Reflective essay, where the writer reflects on a scenario or an event. So they tell us like how they felt. So they basically reflect on their feelings. And then an argumentative essay, this is to argue or defend the writer's idea. And a discursive essay, which is where the writer looks at a topic from a balanced view. So they look at both sides, and then at the end, when they conclude their writing, they choose a side. So for example, if the topic of the essay is about AI, so maybe the essay topic could be, has artificial intelligence improved our lives? So the writer would present or look at AI from both sides, so the negatives and the positives, and then conclude whether they agree or disagree with the topic. Okay, then with transactional types, we have informal letters. Those are letters that are casual, like letters to a friend. We have formal letters. Those are very formal, not casual, like letters to the editor, letters to a university, and so forth. We have curriculum vitae or CVs, covering letters, articles, agendas, and minutes of meetings, and so forth. Okay, so we're going to take a look at applying the writing process to a discursive essay. So I have included a topic on abortion. So should abortion be legal, or abortion should be illegal? This is actually a statement. So in the pre-writing stage, the learner would firstly have to do research on abortion so that they can have all the facts, so that they know what they're writing about exactly. Draw up a mind map of all the important things that they're going to mention. So they select the information that's most useful to them, information that's going to get them most marks. And then they decide on who their target audience is. So obviously, the teacher is the main target audience. That's who they're trying to get marks from. And then drafting, they need to use the main ideas from planning, use the criteria given by the teacher to guide them, make sure that their word choice is appropriate, age appropriate, also because we're doing English as a home language, so they need to make sure that their word choice is of that home language level. And they also need to get feedback from their classmates or their parents or even teachers, so they can give them their written pieces to read, their essays to read, and then they can give them feedback on whether they think it's written well or not. If it's not written well, what can they do to improve it? And if it is written well, they can go ahead to the next steps. So that is revising, editing, proofreading, and presenting. So they need to use the criteria to check the amended draft, remove all slang or inappropriate language, proofread, and present their final pieces. And then when it comes to a transactional piece, I've chosen formal writing. So pre-writing, this would include deciding who the letter will be addressed to. Will it go to a university, an editor, a company, and so forth? Read up on the correct formats to use. So they need to know what format to use exactly. Look at examples or templates online and draw up a mind map of the things that they will mention. So their draft will basically include like formal words. They have to make sure that they use the correct words, that they're not too casual. They don't use words like hey, hi. So it would be words like good morning or good day or to whom it may concern, and so forth. So for the final stages, revising, editing, proofreading, and presenting, they need to remove any informal language that they might have. In the letter, use the criteria to check if they did well, read it again to check for any grammar errors, or incorrect punctuation and present their final draft afterwards. So the benefits of teaching writing as a process is that it helps learners to produce high quality and well-planned work. Also, their work becomes coherent. It's also a great way to teach learners not to rush or scribble when they're given written assignments like essays and transactional pieces. The challenges that teachers might encounter can be that learners might complain about the process being too long, and some teachers might not be too keen to support learners or rather to help them with all the steps that need to be taken. Okay, so that's all for our presentation today, or rather our workshop, but I do have 3 questions that I would like for all the teachers to answer. So the first question, where do you think the learners lack when it comes to the writing process? So which phase or which step exactly? Is it the pre-planning or pre-writing phase? Is it drafting? Is it editing? Is it reviewing? Is it publishing or presenting? So what can be done to motivate learners or rather arouse a writing interest in them, and which form of writing do learners enjoy the most? Okay, thank you so much, teachers. If you have any questions, you can email me at 2120 3718 at stadio.ac.za. And lastly, this is my reference list. So this is where I got all of my information from, our CAPS document, and also a guideline for teaching and writing essays and transactional text, which is also a Department of Basic Education piece. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to end our recording, and I hope you enjoyed this workshop, and I hope it's going to be useful. Thank you.